Can we just first start off about your sit-downs with Trump? 6 times after he left the White House, which, is such a different period thinking about what's happening in Virginia tonight and seeing his grip on the Republican Party. I mean, what was he like? What did you observe from him when you sat down with him?
So I interviewed Donald Trump more than any other journalist since he's left the White House. We started in May 2021, and that report you just talked about meandering and confusing is right. He goes from one story to the next. He struggles with the chronology of events. He seems very upset that he wasn't respected by certain celebrities in the White House, and then he'd go to a story about The Apprentice. So as you know, Caitlin, it's very challenging to interview Donald Trump and to go toe-to-toe with him, but there was some cognitive questions about where he was and what he was thinking, and he would from time to time become confused.
Because you wrote at one point about Joan Rivers, him telling you that she voted for him in 2016, I believe, even though...
He confidently told me and declared that Joan Rivers voted for him when he ran for president, and Joan Rivers died in 2014. Joan Rivers died in 2014, so she would not have been able to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and because you talked about his memory, you wrote that, on some days I have the feeling he has no idea who he's even talking to, that he actually forgot or didn't remember that the two of you had spoken at your first sit-down interview.
Right, so my first sit-down was in May. He wasn't doing a lot of interviews, and then we sat down again towards the end of the summer. And when I sat down, there was a very blank expression on his face. So I asked, do you remember when we spoke recently? And he said, no, I have no memory of that. And he couldn't recall. He said it was a long time ago. And then we had to start from scratch. So the interview started from square one, where he started telling me the same exact stories that I heard in our first interview. So from there, then we did more interviews so that we could cover more ground, but it was a little bit like Groundhog Day.
This is Inside the Right. That was the author who interviewed Donald Trump 6 times discussing his cognitive state. So, Tim, it looks like we're now locked in a battle where the next 5 months are going to be about who's more brain-addled, the guy on the left or the guy on the right. Where do you see this going, this whole strategy? And do you think it's an effective approach by each respective side?
I do. And before I get into the strategy, I just want to say it's something that I've just been mulling over listening to this clip is it worse to lie about Joan Rivers voting for you or to be confused about whether Joan Rivers voted for you or to be totally delusional about who's dead and who's alive? Because they're all kind of bad in different ways. And, Donald Trump has always been a bragger and, a bullshitter. But like this stuff does seem tangibly different, right? And it comes on the heels of, I don't know if you discussed this last week, his meeting with the CEOs at the Business Roundtable, where Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC reported that several of the CEOs gave a similar report to this author about how in the private conversation, Trump felt very addled, like he wasn't making a lot of sense. His stories were going down tangents. It was worse than usual.
So you're saying this feels a little different than the usual, just Donald Trump going off on his usual tangents, because this is kind of more untethered to reality than it was before.
Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump's a lunatic, right? And Donald Trump's old. Like, those two things are kind of standard. And he's advanced conspiracy theories and extreme stuff. And all of that is the same as it's been since 2016 and really probably the 1980s. Like, the question is, to get back to your original question, is if this campaign is going to include a lot of rhetoric about how the candidates are not mentally up for the job. And the Republicans and Fox are certainly going to make that mostly their whole campaign about Joe Biden. Then the question about whether it's that Donald Trump is declining even more from the low baseline, I think is a real one. It's an important one, and Democrats should bring it up. And in this case, it was not Democrats even or anti-Trump forces. It was 2 reporters that brought it up. One who was interviewing about The Apprentice, who wasn't even a political reporter, and then the other one, who heard from business CEOs. So I think that's a relevant data point, and I absolutely think Democrats should use that, in addition to the videos of Trump just being crazy, to validate their argument and say it's not me, Chris Murphy or AOC or whoever saying this. It's CEOs that are saying this. It's an author that interviewed him 6 times saying it.
Do you think that this would effectively neutralize the attack against that Republicans wage against Joe Biden by saying like, okay, yeah, you're claiming that he is in the throes of cognitive decline, but then look at Donald Trump, look at somebody who, and I've used this list before, basically says that Jeb Bush was responsible for getting us involved in the Middle East, who says that
We didn't do that, just to be clear. Jeb was I worked for Jeb. I'm certain that Jeb did not get us into the Middle East. I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah. That he's claiming that Obama is still the president. He claims you need ID to buy bread. He claims that Nikki Haley was in charge of security at the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? So I guess the question is, do you think that will neutralize that talking point against Joe Biden in kind of the same way that Republicans know that Donald Trump's hands are dirty in the sense that he is a criminal, and so they ran this 15-month impeachment inquiry effort against Joe Biden, trying to claim that he's part of the Biden crime family because they know that they can't prove to people that Trump's hands are clean, but they can certainly try to show people that Biden's hands are dirty. And so they kind of effectively tried to neutralize Trump's criminality. So do you think they're going to be able to, that the Biden campaign is going to be able to flip the script and do that to the Trump campaign here?
I think that it's worth a try. I think that the proof is going to be in the pudding on this. Like, we're going to have a debate next week, and millions of people are going to be able to judge for themselves. I think that the big challenge for the Biden campaign, and why I think this is worth the effort, and I think the Biden campaign, to their credit, has started to work on this more, I've noticed, on social media over the last month or two. And I think that this is right, is it has to be highlighted for these low information voters, just how deranged Donald Trump has become. And part of that is going to be using clips of Donald Trump's own speeches and gaffes, the ones that you mentioned, or just his weird comments about sharks and electricity and whatever. Like, there are a lot of ways to make Donald Trump look crazy. He does that for himself quite a bit. And part of it is going to be using these reports from validators and other people. And you got to promote those. You got to promote them on TikTok. You got to promote them here on YouTube. And you need to get in front of people, because the Republicans, are very good at this. Like if you just put aside the merits of which candidate looks older, sounds older, is older, yeah, whatever. Like, they're both old, right?
Yeah.
The difference right now is that the Republican apparatus, the right-wing infotainment machine, is damn good at like taking these videos of Biden, sometimes out of context, often out of context, not always, but often out of context, to like make him look confused and old. And like, the Biden campaign does need to compete on that turf to try to neutralize this, to reach those voters who maybe are gettable for Biden, but have been influenced by seeing these videos. And some people might have been convinced by some of these right-wing videos that have been put out about Biden. And so they've got to see the other side.
And I think there is a big danger in kind of ceding that ground to the right and not looking at it and saying, okay, this is all just nonsense, and so we're not going to validate it with a response, because when you do that and you basically cede all of that ground to the right, and you allow this void to be filled by that right-wing disinformation, you have what happened ahead of 2016, where it's just Hillary's emails, and the left did nothing to rebut any of that, because we didn't think that it was legitimate enough to even deign to talk about. And by the end of the election, I mean, that was a story that most people thought that Hillary Clinton was like steeped in criminality as the result of that she was a major national security threat. And so I think we have to recognize that when these disinformation campaigns come forward, even if they don't seem worth our time to like engage with, I think we can't just allow them to fill the void that's created and not kind of rebut it, because they will be really effective at pushing forward whatever narrative they're trying to push forward.
Yeah, as a former opposition research man on the Republican side, I want to go even one step further than that, because you're right, they have to be rebutted, and the Hillary strategy on this was disastrous. It was not just on emails, but it was also on Hillary being sick and old. I mean, like, they pushed that. Remember that time where she slipped or whatever? Or like,
I think there was like a time she coughed or something, and that was like front page news.
Yeah, it was horrible, and the Hillary campaign didn't feel like, don't wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty. Like, that's the kind of cliche that people say, and like, that's just wrong. And the thing that worries me a little bit about this time is that the left is going to go one step further, but not two steps. And let me explain. Like, the one step further is to say, no, this is false. That's a cheap fake. Like you played a 5 second video that makes Biden look lost, but if you play the 6 second video, you realize he's actually just sitting down in the chair. You
Yeah.
actually just realize that he's acknowledging the soldier that's over there out of picture, right? Like you have to do that. You have to point out that it's false, but you also have to fight fire with fire, right? Like the people that are getting these Biden videos, these anti-Biden videos, also need to get videos about Trump
Right.
being deranged and demented and old and falling down and saying stupid stuff and crazy and conspiracy addled and extreme. Right? You got to do that part of it too, or else you get into this environment where it's like accusation, defense, and then like a lot of people see the accusation but only some people see the defense, right? Like
Right.
you gotta punch back too, and I do think the Democrats are doing more of this time, but I think more is more.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. Democrats can fall into the trap of constantly being on the defensive because it seems like, I mean, this is my perspective here, but the right has way less scruples when it comes to this stuff, and so they'll put these stories forward. We had the New York Post story where Biden was apparently meandering, when he had the parachutist was just off frame. There was the big story this past week about Biden at the LA fundraiser where they just used a couple seconds, 2 or 3 seconds, where Biden was just standing there, and apparently you can't stand for 2 seconds without the right thinking that you had a Mitch McConnell-esque freeze moment, and I was in the theater, by the way. Biden was not frozen or had no cognitive impairment. He was waving to the crowd in kind of the same way that after the State of the Union, Biden was there for so long that he outlasted the C-SPAN cameras. This is a guy who, if he, when left to his own devices, will stand at the edge of that stage and just wave at people and be with the crowd for as long as he possibly can. I think it was just Obama who wanted to get the hell out of there. But regardless, I think Democrats do have, a tendency to kind of just allow Republicans to fill the zone, to flood the zone with shit, to use Steve Bannon's own term, and then just constantly be fighting, going on the defensive and trying to butt back, everything that's thrown at us.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And I worry that to the defensive point, it's like, okay, if the whole conversation is, Republicans say Biden, froze, and the Democrats say, no, that's not true. Like you're still kind of just talking about whether or not Biden froze.
Right. You're
Like,
still
that's
you're
not
still
good,
playing
right?
on their terrain. You're still you're still in the universe of Biden being in the throes of cognitive decline.
Right. And so that's why it's better to also talk about, hey, did you see that Donald Trump did an interview with this reporter 6 times and, he thought that Joan Rivers voted for him when Joan Rivers was dead. And like he forgot that this reporter existed. And he also thought pretended like he was still in charge of the generals in Afghanistan. I mean, like now we're laughing at Trump, right? Like now we're into better territory. I didn't know that you were at that event there in LA. I was happy. The other thing about that event, just as an aside, is I was happy that at that event, this got overshadowed. Biden went after the Supreme Court and went after Sam Alito, which he hadn't before, and made a little dig about the upside down flag and whether or not the people in the audience wanted Donald Trump to be appointing 2 more justices, who are going to be turning their flags upside down in solidarity with the insurrectionists. And I think that's another good line of messaging that I hope to see more of from Biden.
I do too, and I think that's especially potent because that's even a nod to people who don't support Joe Biden himself. Because this election really isn't about Joe Biden. This election is about who's going to appoint 2 more justices on the Supreme Court. If Trump wins another term, he's going to be able to appoint a replacement for Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. So regardless of your thoughts on Biden, this is a nod to those folks who may be upset with him on inflation, on housing, on Israel and Gaza, whatever it may be, that this election is going to be so much bigger than Biden himself. It's going to outlast Joe Biden himself, who probably, only has so many years left, but we're going to be here a lot longer than he is. And so do we want to be here with a 6-3 conservative court that's entrenched that way, far-right court that's entrenched that way for the rest of our lives? Or do we want to, vote for him knowing that it's not just a punishment based on what he's done in office, but just kind of a vote on the kind of country that we want to live in moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I liked he got almost to the message, which is right there, which is to younger voters and some of the younger voters who have been reluctant to go along with Biden for some of the reasons you laid out. It's like if Donald Trump wins this election, there will be a Supreme Court majority of people that Donald Trump appointed for most of your life. like until you're as old as Joe Biden, right? Like literally, like these people are all young. They will be on the Supreme Court for 30 years, 40 years. You're going to be an old person when the Supreme Court no longer is totally dominated by Donald Trump appointees. Like that is insane and that is scary. And hopefully that can be a motivating argument.
Perfectly put. And of course, you've been beating this drum not just on the Supreme Court stuff, but especially on how to effectively rebut a lot of this right-wing disinformation over at The Bulwark. That is the YouTube channel that Tim is on throughout the week. If you watching right now are not yet subscribed to The Bulwark, really important to build up this pro-democracy ecosystem that spans from left to right. Tim's work is especially important because it gives a permission structure for those former Republicans or current Republicans or independents to know that it's okay to not support Donald Trump, that there's another way. So if you're not yet subscribed to The Bulwark, please make sure to subscribe. We'll put the links right here on this screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.